Aloha. Aloha. My name's Serge Kahili King. Welcome to the Hawaiian Art Museum and our Wednesday evening Talk Story. Now, we get into the Talk Story part of the evening where we talk about Hawaiian culture, history, legend, language, healing, and the philosophy that we call Huna, based on 7 ideas about life. That the world is what you think it is, there are no limits. Energy flows where attention goes. Now is the moment of power. To love is to be happy with. All power comes from within. And effectiveness is the measure of truth. We talk about these things in the way that I was brought up, and that's by question and answer. But I'd like to begin by sharing a little bit of culture with you. And sometimes I do legend, and sometimes I just give some cultural information. Well, tonight it's going to be cultural information, because we're going to talk about something which is very, very Hawaiian, because you don't see it in any of the other islands or any place else around the world in this form. And it has to do with these things that you see on either side of me. They're called kahilis. And I'll tell you just a little bit about them. When we look in the dictionary, the basic meaning is a standard. You know what a standard means when we're talking about this? Some of you may not, but in old Europe, why, for instance, the troops or the procession in front of the king or the emperor would carry a pole with something on it, some kind of insignia. That's called a standard. Well, these were standards for the royalty in old Hawaii. And the name kahili is also used for if you see a rainbow that only has a single shaft, because of the cloud patterns, that's also called a kahili. And it symbolizes the presence of royalty as well. Okay? And the interesting thing about these, some of the information I have comes from a book that's way out of print, but probably one of the best books on Hawaiian culture ever done. It was called Hawaii, A Pictorial History. And the text comes from a man named Edward Jesting, who wrote one of the best books on this island, Kauai. And so some of the things that he said about it are a few of the things that I'll quote about the standards themselves. Kahilis were made for special to a particular chief. And they were displayed when important persons gathered together. They were also at funerals and during public displays of things. The early Westerners who visited Hawaii were very impressed by these. There was a man, Reverend C.S. Stewart. We have one of his original books over here, written in the 1800s. He said, "There's something approaching the sublime in the lofty noddings of the kahilis of state, as they tower above the heads of the group whose distinction they proclaim." Kind of poetic, but they were very impressive. Now, where they began, where these things came from, originated, most probably, because they're the same name and the same shape, is from this thing, which is also called a kahili. And one of the meanings of the word kahili, in addition to being a royal standard, means to brush, to switch, to, like to brush away, because these were used as fly whisks. Now, one thing I found was interesting when I came here, because I had been to Africa, lived in Africa a number of years, was that a symbol of a chief in Africa was that he held a fly whisk made of horsehair. And when we look at some of the old drawings that were made of chiefs when the early Westerners came here to make pictures of them, we also see a lot of the royalty either carrying fly whisks themselves or having people near them move the fly whisk to keep the flies off. Okay? But it was a very similar thing that the fly whisk became a symbol of royalty both in Africa and here in Hawaii. I thought that very interesting. A couple of the things about how they're manufactured. They used feathers, of course, as you can see, wide variety of feathers in the old days. They used feathers from the tropic bird, from the frigate bird, from the owl, from the jungle fowl that most people here think are chickens. Okay? There's a difference between jungle fowl and chickens, folks. The jungle fowl actually fly and they roost in trees. They look like chickens, but they're actually called jungle fowl. But anyway, they would use the feathers of those as well. Feathers themselves, they would have a strand of coconut midrib from a coconut tree, from the leaf. And that's what, and they would use some Olona fiber, and they would tie the feathers to that. But what's really interesting is if the kahilis were not going to be used for a while, then they'd untie all the feathers, put them in a special calabash, which is a wooden bowl, and keep them until it was time to use them again. Then somebody had to tie all those feathers on again and remake the thing. The pole, there's several ways to do the pole. The easiest way to make a pole was to use a spear. This was a typical fly whisk. Some of them were smaller than this, of course, but these could be as high as 20 feet. Really huge, 18 inches in diameter for the feathers. Okay, and the pole was, like I said, either a spear, and they did have 18-foot spears in the old days, but they would also have, if they wanted to make a really fine pole, they'd have a thin stick of kawila wood, which is a very, very hard wood, and then they would put rings on that, either turtle shell or ivory or bone. And then sometimes the poles even were made of human leg bone. From a chief who was defeated in battle, that would be a way of remembering the chief. They'd make the pole for the kahili out of a human leg bone too. That would be the small kahilis. Just to give you a bit of information more about what's happening today, in the old days, of course, they had people who made these. You're going to learn some more about them in a moment. But there's a man, a maintenance engineer, named, his name is Herman Lum, or Lamb actually, not Lum, Lamb. And he works as a maintenance engineer for the outrigger Waikiki. And this was from an article in the Star Bulletin from newspaper in Honolulu. And somehow he got into it, it explains it in the article, but he got into volunteering to make the kahilis that are used for the royal court at the Aloha Festival. Now, every year in Hawaii, we have this big, long festival, lasts several months, called the Aloha Festivals. And at the beginning, why they choose a king and a queen in the royal court. And they dress up like they did in the old days of Kamehameha the Great. And they make presentations at all the great openings of the different festival activities. And of course, they have to have their kahili. And the kahilis last about 2 years before they start to deteriorate. And so this guy, together with some people who helped, he learned from 2 Hawaiians how to do the feather work. And so he makes them together. Now he said the small ones take about 7 to 10 hours and use about 500 feathers. The big ones, which are 9 foot, the kind that they use for the festival, the 9-foot ones, takes 3 months with an awful lot of help, and they use 7,000 feathers. Okay? So it's a big deal. Now, the kahilis were very much loved, and you know it's part of Hawaiian tradition to think of everything as alive, aware, and responsive, even these powerful symbols. And so there have then grown up names and chants about them. And so these kahilis were made by members of our halau, our own hula halau, and we have members here tonight, and I'd like them to tell about their experience with it and present a chant. Yes?
Before we do that, can I ask you what the name of your Hawaiian family is and how that...
Okay, let's say how that relates. My family name is Kahili, which I took as my middle name when my uncle died. He was the last male of the line. But that's not the full name. The full name is Kahili Okamoku. But it's not the same as this Kahili. This Kahili is actually Kahili. It's got what's called a macron or a kahako over the first A. So it's elongated. Kahili. It's one word. My family name is Kahili. which means the. Hili in the sense of my family name means the braiding, because Hili, one of the meanings of Hili is to braid things together. So Kahilioko-moku has two meanings. One is the braiding together of the islands, bringing the islands together. And because moku is a word that means anything which is separate. So moku can be an island, moku can be a ship, moku can be an airplane, they call it mokulele, flying island. Moku can be a district, anything which is cut off, separated from something else. So the family name means to bring together that which is separate. Okay? And so that's part of the tradition of the family. So it's not the same kahili. Okay. So would you like to make a presentation, please? I'm going to give it all to you.
Lono ika makahiki e ali Hawaii loa kainoa a o ke kahiri Ua kapu Hawaii loa Ua velano Hakuia i ka hulu Manu o Kie Hawaii loa Ke kauala i luna Kuke kahiri kapu Moe ke kanaka Ilihia i kanani O Hawaii loa Veli, veli e kahiri O ke akua E hoai lona ke kahiri E kuleana Mai ka makahiko o Maoloa Mai ka makahiko o Maoloa He no no lono I ka makahiki
Mahalo nui loa. Very, very nice. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Now we'll get into the rest of the talk story part of the evening, where we'll talk about all the things I mentioned before by question and answer. You give the questions. The answers come from my knowledge of Hawaii, from what I've been taught, from inspiration from the spirits and the land. So every time we meet together, your questions take us on a different journey. Who would like to take the first step tonight?
What about the colors of the kahila? Do different islands or different chiefs have a particular color that signify them?
Well, you know, today every island has its own color, but that's a modern innovation. What would happen in the old days, however, would be very often a chief would pick a particular color to represent his nobles. And so if they went to battle, all of his people would be dressed in the malo, or the old bark cloth outfit that they wore, dyed a particular color. They did not associate that with the island. They associated that with the chief. Okay? So, but today, because, you know, in the United States, in fact, I don't know any place else in the world that does this. There's a state bird, there's a state tree, there's a state frog in some places. There's, you know, well, this carried over to the counties because we don't really have cities in Hawaii. We have one city only. We don't have any incorporated townships or anything like that. We have mayors of counties. So each county kind of felt it was sort of like a little state. So each county then, each group of islands has its own lei and has its own color that's associated with it. But that's all fairly modern innovation. Yeah.
What bird do those particular banners come from? The white feathers?
Yeah, where'd the white ones come from? They look like long chicken feathers to me. That's very common today. The chicken feathers are most easily obtained. Right. Probably white rock. I used to raise chickens. That's what it looks like. Yes?
In that chant we did, Chief Lonely Kamaki, and many of you had theirs done from the the bird.
Oh, sure.
And they were yellow feathers.
That's right. Yellow was in ancient times the primary color of royalty. And it was reserved for royalty. And again, this is just a little coincidental thing. Hawaii had a feudal type of society, and in the feudal society of Europe, yellow was the royal color too. Okay? Very interesting. The royal buildings were all painted a particular shade of yellow, and no one else could use that color. But anyway, here, no one else could get these feathers from this bird. Now, the o'o had two feathers, two yellow feathers coming out down from its body. And so they would capture these things. They used a kind of a sticky gum and put it on a tree branch where the birds would land and get stuck. And then they'd go and they'd pluck these two feathers and let them go so that they would grow new ones. But you know, if you had a huge kahili that took maybe 3,000 feathers, okay, whew, that's 1,500 birds, okay? And they would have wiped them out way too fast if they killed everyone they took. There were also EEV and other birds that had red feathers. The red was a sacred color as well, mostly used by the priesthood. Sometimes you would have a chief who was also a priest. So you'd have both yellow and red in his cape, in his headdress, and in his kahili. Yeah.
When I was in Tibet, I saw the Tibetan monks wearing in ceremony things that looked exactly like our chiefs.
Yeah, this has been noted before. The chiefs here had a helmet of a type that is almost identical to the size and shape of what is worn by the Tibetan lamas. Okay, does that indicate any kind of a connection in the past? There's really no way to know. But it is odd, with all the different kinds of hats and headdresses that human beings have come up with around the world, that these two should be so identical. They also use the same kind of trumpet in Tibet. Yeah, in Tibet, way up in the middle of the mountains. Yes.
I work with Native Americans of North America quite a bit, and of all the tribes that I've come across, the Hopi seem to exude aloha more than anyone.
Yes.
Now, one of my friends was, when I met him, was about 108, and that was grandfather Menangwe. And I asked him where the Hopi came from. Now, you may know that their legend says they came from a hole at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
It's one of them, right.
But he said they came from the South Seas, an island in the South Sea.
I've heard this also. There are among the Hopi, there are different versions of their origin, and some of the Hopi, like you just mentioned, say that they came from the Pacific Ocean. And they are one of the few who have an adventurer shaman tradition, which is one that's not so much, for the healing, is not so much based on a warrior point of view as it is what we call an adventurer point of view, which is more aloha.
Is there anything in the Hawaiian legends that would suggest that people left from Polynesia or from here that may have ended up over there?
Oh, well, yes, of course. That's very well known. Let's take, for instance, among the Maori people, the Maori legend is that they came from Hawaii. Now, the problem is they don't like to agree on where Hawaii was. So there are some of the Maori who say that meant Hawaii, and they left from South Point on Big Island. And they point out, and there are Maori who come every year in a pilgrimage to that place where they took off. We know that there was a great emigration at one point when Hawaiian Islands were invaded from the south, and that Polynesians scattered everywhere. We also know that these were the greatest navigators in the world. And they navigated everywhere. I have found histories and records of a Polynesian settlement in Cabo San Lucas that was there when the Spanish arrived. And these were Polynesian people, and it's recorded in their histories and recorded in their museums in Mexico. The Peruvian government says that the original Peruvians came from Polynesia. There are a lot of cultural similarities and ties with the Northwest Coast Indians of Canada. Okay? And then over in Micronesia, there's all kinds of islands that are called outliers, which are inhabited by Polynesians in the middle of Micronesia. And they're always the best wood carvers. So we've got all kinds of indications. People try to say, well, all these people came to the Pacific. These were the navigators, folks. These were the people who knew how to sail anywhere, and they did it. And they sailed everywhere. There are no Polynesian stories of having come from someplace else. Okay?
What year are we talking? Isn't it like chronological?
Okay, I know Westerners love that, right? Yeah, we want to know, what year, when did it happen? Polynesians couldn't care less. And a couple of reasons for that. First of all, they did not keep track of their years. They did not keep historical records. I know some people, even some Hawaiians, like to think that the petroglyphs were historical records. That is not the case. Their language is based on the present moment, doesn't even have a past tense. They didn't celebrate anniversaries, they didn't celebrate birthdays, except the first birthday of the eldest child. But other than that, no anniversaries. Anything that happened before 1778, we haven't a clue. We don't even know when Kamehameha was born.
So we don't really know how long we were here.
Have no idea. Now, what can we tell? The latest things that I've read show remains of habitation by carbon dating, which is always a plus or minus. And the earliest one I've found so far that's discussed is about 500 AD. Now, all that means, it doesn't mean that that's when people came here. It means that's when somebody found a fire. The remains of a fire. Let's remember that. Okay? There's this tendency on the part of anthropologists to, when they find something, that's when it happened. No, it just means that that's where somebody had a fire. You have no idea how many other fires there were before that. Okay, so we really don't have a clue as to any dates. Yes?
So it's an honor to be back here since the first visit in 1996, and was grateful last night to creators that the lights went out, and I looked out over Princeville and thought, I wonder if this is out by the Hawaiian. Would you know anything about that?
Yeah, it wasn't an issue.
It wasn't an issue.
And I can tell you why. It's again because of that present moment orientation. See? This post-traumatic syndrome, which happens in war, but happens in lots of other kinds of situations as well, happens when people make a decision that they cannot do not want this thing to have happened. And so they try to push it out of their minds, but the very pushing out of their minds keeps it in their mind. And there's a constant buildup of stress, of tension because of that, constant reinforcement of something terrible that happened. In the West, as well as in the East, to a great extent, a tremendous amount of importance culturally is given to the past. I mean, it's so much a part of the culture that we take it for granted and think that that's the way things are, when it's only a feature of our language. Okay? So when the past becomes so important, look at all of the anniversaries that people celebrate of tragedies. Okay? And yeah, they celebrate good anniversaries too, but there's this worshiping, practically, of the past. Now here you have people that didn't worship the past. Done, gone, that's it. There were no family feuds. They didn't have such a thing. You'd have individuals who might seek revenge within a given lifetime, but their kids surely didn't pay any attention to that whatsoever. And forgiveness was, they had all kinds of means for forgiving such disputes. So they had no, that kind of thing wasn't part of their culture. Okay? Neither was the sense of guilt. The sense of doing wrong was, and the solution was to start doing right. Seriously, I mean, it sounds too simple, but that's what you do. You don't dwell in remorse and unhappiness and all that kind of stuff. So because of the cultural base, that kind of problem didn't come up for them. Okay? Now, one of the biggest, I might as well mention something about the problem itself. The biggest part of the problem is that the memories are trying to be suppressed, which only keeps increasing layers of tension. And nothing is being resolved. There are ways today, some people have come up with other ways of doing it from other traditions, but there are ways in using Hawaiian concepts as well, whereby these layers can be peeled away, and in a very short time, this whole condition can be relieved. Now, one of these techniques I know of today that's been very successful in that has been, it's called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, by a man named Gary Craig. Had great success with veterans in Los Angeles. Okay? We have done a lot similar things with a technique that I've called Dynamine, based on 4 Hawaiian techniques, that does the same thing. Relieves the layers and changes the mind about. Now, I just want to say that there are ways to do this by changing the relationship to the memories. And it's not a hard process, and it can happen quite quickly. But in Hawaii, it wasn't an issue in the old days. Today, there are different kinds of post-traumatic syndrome in Hawaii because of the absorption of Western culture, which again lays so much emphasis on past events.
Explain what that's depicting.
Well, this painting, or a print of a painting by a man named Joseph Parker in 1970, is his depiction of, how can I put it, a place in the spirit world that in Hawaiian would be called Paliuli, and a few other names, Kanihunamoku, but in other places have called Shangri-La and things like this. So this was his idea of spiritual paradise. He based it on his perception of Kauai. But it was his vision. So the yellow thing there, it's called the path. The path that leads to paradise, and Kauai was used to typify paradise, unsurprisingly. Yes?
Could you please describe the 4 levels of reality in trying to accelerate or manifest something? Are you working 4 levels?
Okay.
Work on that.
First, I have to explain what 4 levels of reality means. When I was brought up in this knowledge, I was taught 4 different ways to look at the world. And so, unfortunately, translation is a problem. So when we say 4 levels of reality, people think of other dimensions, and that's not what this is. It's 4 different ways of looking at this world. And it was kind of categorized, it's in Hawaiian, with the words Ike. Now, Ike is a word that has meanings of awareness. In the dictionary, you'll find one of these levels. It's called Ike Papalua. And it refers to psychic abilities. Well, in my training, this was a whole set of ways of perceiving things using psychic abilities. In other words, in this experience of reality, second level, telepathy and clairvoyance and all these things exist naturally. And so you can communicate with things and with people and share energy and do all those kind of astral travel and do all this kind of stuff if you accept a second level way of looking at things. First level is based on the idea that everything is separate. It's a very common scientific, technological level today. And so you deal with things and their interactions. So you want to make a computer, why you take all these different objects made of all kinds of different materials and put them together to make a computer. Although I have to say, the most modern computers are edging into second level. Okay? But anyway, yeah, because there's things happening that they cannot explain using first level physics. At any rate, normally you put together an airplane and you can fly. You put together things out of other things and there's interactions. This is first level. Everything is separate. So if you want to change something at first level, you have to change it physically. You have to use your words, open, outward. You have to use your physical actions. That's how you change things. Second level, you might also do that, but in addition, you would communicate telepathically, clairvoyantly, energetically, to assist the process. I'll give you a slight example. If you want to open a jar, a first level way of opening the jar is to grab the jar and twist it off. Okay, if you want to twist off the cover, right? Okay. A second level way of opening the jar would be to take hold of the jar and say, hey, lid, I'd really appreciate it if you'd come off easy. Thank you very much. And 9 times out of 10, it does. Now, did you really talk to the lid? Well, if you're in second level, yes, you did. From a first level, your only out is coincidence. Okay? You can't have any other explanation. But when you shift to a second level, that, hey, I can talk to the lid, and the lid will cooperate with me if I'm nice to it. And the amazing thing is, you get results most of the time. This is not control, so that's why it's most of the time. Now, third level assumes that everything is a dream. So when you want to change things at third level, you perceive this reality as a dream. And what do you do in a dream? Well, you change the dreamer, you change the dream. So you change your perception of things. Your ideas about it, your ideas of possibilities and impossibilities and rules, and you change yourself in relation to the dream. And things change. Now, fourth level is very much like what mystics aspire to, where you become one with something. Well, in fourth level, as I learned it, why this is where traditionally it's called shape changing, but you become one with something and then you have the power of that thing. If you can become one with it, to the degree you can become one with it. We see this today sometimes when people are doing the hula. when somebody plays the role of Pele. Doesn't happen all the time, but every once in a while you can watch a dance and suddenly the person is not a dancer dancing a dance. Pele is present. You can feel it. Okay? She has merged for however long she does. I watched one girl do this for a whole dance. It was awesome. Martial artists talk about this when they talk about that I was making the moves and it wasn't me making the moves were making me. That's how it's described sometimes. Okay? This is fourth level. You become that which you want. So, when we're looking in terms of manifesting, which simply means getting things to happen that you want to happen, the way I was taught, you go back and forth between each of these according to which is most appropriate for what you're doing at the moment. Okay? So sometimes first level is the most appropriate way to act. And sometimes fourth, third, second. Sometimes you can switch back and forth real quickly. If you get really good, you can hold 2 or more levels at the same time. Okay? That takes practice usually. But you use the one, you shift your point of view that helps you accomplish what you want to accomplish.
A good movie. Everybody is doing that.
Sure.
You're totally
They're usually,
there with the character. You believe the character. You believe in the story.
you tend to identify with it. That's right.
You get all emotional.
That's right. That's right. It
That
happens.
short,
This is,
that 2-hour period of time, the whole group.
This idea of identifying with things is a very natural human process. So none of these things are outside the range of what most of us do to some degree every day. Some of it we may not pay attention to. Some of we men don't have telepathy. They have hunches. Okay? Okay? It's not cool to have telepathy. Okay? But we do all of these things. My tradition simply makes it a practice to learn how to do them at will. That's all.
Talk to weeds.
Now I know what he's talking about, you see, because you got to remember, this is not a system of control. It's not that it shouldn't be, it can't be. Okay? Just because you merge with something doesn't mean you control it. Because everything has its own will. The more persuasive you can be, the better the results. But some things are just very willful. And so when you do merge, if you're truly merging, you discover the possibilities. And sometimes these possibilities do not include what you want. So what I'm going to say right now may make some people unhappy, but that's the risk you have in teaching all the time. I found this out with roaches. Now, these islands have a lot of roaches. And our home, when we first came here, had a lot of roaches. And so I just finally got tired of that. And I didn't want to go killing roaches all over the place. So I said, okay, we're going to have a tune in. So I tuned in deeply with the roaches. They are arrogant. Believe me, they have been here much longer than we have, and they expect to be here far longer than we're going to be. Okay, so they just don't take anything. So I was finally able to communicate with what I would call the Almakua of the roaches. And so I had to do it more in a third level rather than a fourth level, because fourth level, they couldn't care less. Okay? But they're intelligent beings. So when I did communicate from a third level, second, third level, I made a deal with them. I said, look, you're in my house. And there's not an awful lot I can do about that. I know that. But I'm going to make this deal with you. As long as you stay out of my sight. Now you see, I'm not everywhere at once. You can be all over the place and I won't know it. I said, okay. If I don't see you, we don't have a problem. If I see you, I'm going to interpret that as meaning you would like me to help you reincarnate. Well, now the most amazing thing is that gradually, and it didn't take a long time, gradually we started seeing fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer roaches. Now it's very, very rare. And when they come out, they sit and wait. Seriously. Okay? Now I think the fastest, most humane way is get the spray. Okay, it's very fast, very quick. And so that's what I do. A lot of people wouldn't like that, but I think it's humane. But it works. Now, to show you how few there are in our house, we recently had our house tented for termites. There weren't very many of those, but we had to tent it. And we're expecting to come back to the house full of roaches, because this is what the exterminator people told us, you know, they kill all the roaches. There was one roach in the entire house. And he had come out onto the kitchen table to wait and be reincarnated. Now, just something you said reminded me of something. Susan, she talked about the ginger grass, okay, which reminded me of kahili ginger. Kahili ginger is a beautiful red ginger that looks like a kahili. Yellow, that's right, I'm sorry. Yellow ginger that looks like a kahili. You know what's interesting? Comes from Tibet. Yes.
It was like nothing.
I had a friend from New York tell me once that she was working in her garden with a bunch of rose bushes, and she used one of our techniques that we taught, but because she was starting to get scratched on her hand, and she just stopped and sat and blessed the beauty of the roses. She sat there for a while telling them how pretty they were and how much she enjoyed them and she loved the smell and she really wanted to be friends with them, and she, maybe 2-3 minutes, something like that. And then she went back to work, never got another scratch. Working in the same way with the roses. It's amazing if we will take the time to communicate as if things are alive, we get better results. Now here, for all of you who prefer to stay at first level, just pretend it works anyway, okay? So you don't have to really believe it. Just act like it's true, and you'll still get the results.
Can I pretend that Bush is not president?
Sure. I mean, that's right, it's not correct. Not correct in the Western way of thinking. We're talking about the idea that Captain Cook was thought of as a god. There's a big problem with that because it comes from a Western bias. Westerners think, when they think of gods, suppose that they're thinking of pagan gods, whatever they want to call them, they're still thinking of invisible beings in another dimension. They almost can't help it. Okay? And this is a cultural perception that gets in the way of seeing how other people think. Now, the word for God in Hawaiian is akua. But it really means any spirit whatsoever. The Christian God today in Hawaiian is called Keakua Nui, which means the big spirit, or the great spirit. Okay? But that's the translation. Okay? But akua, it means spirit. Now, everything that was acknowledged had a spirit. Everything. But generally in the language, the word was reserved to the spirits of the most powerful forces of nature and the spirits of the most powerful forces of human beings, meaning the chiefs. So that one of the epithets or names that a chief would have, they would talk about the chief as the god. If you heard the word, for instance, I just came across a chant that talked about Nalani. Now, Nalani means the heavens. But it was referring to the chiefs. Because they were high, they were above everybody else, they had power of life and death. Okay? And they were akua. Anybody who had mana, mana means power or influence. It's not some spiritual invisible thing. It's invisible because it's power or influence. But they would in general terms, usually apply the word akua to those kinds of people. Well, here comes Cook. Not only does he have this really big, from their point of view, really big ship with these incredible sails. They knew what sails were, but they had never seen sails like that. And clothing like they had never seen before, because they wore bark cloth. And the most ordinary bark cloth would just melt if you walked in the water with it. Okay? The bark cloth the chiefs had was a little better than that. But anyway, and nails. He had iron. They knew what iron was. And they saw lots of it. Wow, talk about power. This guy was a high chief. No fooling. Now, here we come with something that happens in other places as well. But in the telling of histories, sometimes the stories of spiritual beings or spirits of nature get mixed up with the stories of human beings. Lono is a case in point. Okay? Lono as a spirit of nature, Lono is the clouds. Lono is the spirit of agriculture, the spirit of herbalism, the actual making of herbs, not the gathering of them, but the making of them. The technology, god of technology, really. Okay? And of, like I say, clouds were one of his symbols. If you looked at the cloud, you were looking at Lono. So there was that Lono. Now, Hawaiians, like other people, would love to name human beings after the names of powerful things. Like in Mexico, so many Mexican men are named Jesus. Okay? Right? It doesn't mean that they're Jesus Christ, God, come back to earth. Okay? That's their name. Well, Lono Ika Makahiki was a human being whose story got mixed up with the story of Lono, the nature spirit. But Lono Ika Makahiki is the one who sailed away in a ship and said that he would return with all kinds of goodies. So here comes Cook in a ship with all kinds of goodies. They thought he was Lono Ika Makahiki reincarnated, an akua, a high chief, a god in their terms. Okay? So that's where that came from. Now, he broke the rules of hospitality. I've got to throw this one in. Now, that's why he got himself into a situation where he could be killed. Okay? It's not that they attacked him. He did things to provoke them and made them all unhappy because he came back after the feast was over insisting on having the same treatment. And that's not done. And then one of his men killed one of the Hawaiian chiefs. I mean, really, you stop to think about it, the Hawaiians were remarkably restrained. They had to be tremendously provoked, which they were. And then Cook was in the middle of it. Yeah.
To be historically accurate, don't you think we should call him, in the past tense, Captain Cooked?
Oh. Well, actually, yes. You see, what happened was that after they killed him and took the body, they cooked away the bones. And of course, the way they did that, they would bake him in an oven. That's what they did. And then, so the bones were taken by various chiefs because these were the bones of a powerful chief who was defeated in battle. Okay? But he was a powerful chief nonetheless. In Hawaiian tradition, symbolically, a person's power, their mana, resides in the bones. And so the bones were all split up, but a small bundle was kept and brought back, don't remember that man's name, but the captain who was in charge after Cook on that expedition. Okay, it wasn't Vancouver and it wasn't King. And I can't remember who it was exactly. Anyway, they were brought back to him. And according to the record, the kahunas who brought the bones back said, "Here are the bones of your chief. When is he coming back?" That's interesting. But yeah, technically he was cooked.
Did they use an emo?
Yes.
Underground oven for that?
Yeah, that's how they did it. Right.
What would they do with the meat?
Well, that depends. Usually for a high chief like that, the meat would be taken away and buried. Depends on which caves they were, of course, and how big they were, so forth. The larger caves were used as places of refuge when there were wars or when somebody was escaping from the chiefs or something like that. The smaller caves were generally used for burials. I have a Hawaiian friend who told me about some of the caves in that area of Poliahu. He said there's one cave that you go in one end right near the beach and it comes out way over near Waimea. And he said there's another where it is just full of bones that have turned to dust. I mean, it's a deep, deep cave, but it's filled up with white powder, which is bone dust. Okay. But the chiefs were usually buried in caves that were higher up and less accessible. Now, there's an old story that, you know, they were buried and let down by ropes, and then the ropes were cut so no one would ever know. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. There were no valuables buried with the bones. If it was a very high chief, these things were buried so deep no one would ever find them because that's where the most money was. The ordinary chiefs were buried with honor, but the caves were simply sealed up. I'll tell you, however, about one cave that we happened to find by accident when we were hiking on a valley. What? Miloli'i, that's right. Beautiful valley. And we were hiking up on the edges of the valley, and I can't remember who was the first one to come across it, but one of us,
Wasn't me.
It wasn't you. But anyway, we came across a partly sealed cave where some of the rock sealing it had come off. So we went up and we looked in, and that's where this canoe was, with the bundle in the canoe and the skull on top of it. So we put the rocks back and left it. And I went back a couple of years later, I think. Looked all over. Before I left, I did a triangulation so I'd be sure to find that cave again, exactly where it was in relation to other points on the valley. When I went back, there was no cave. There wasn't any cave there. I looked everywhere. I know. I have pictures of it too. But that cave isn't there anymore. Okay? Oh well. It's a strange island sometimes. It's a strange island. Yes. They had different family relationships and different values given to those family relationships than we are used to. They most commonly, except for certain family relationships, even though you were married, a woman had the right to enjoy herself and a man had the right to enjoy herself. In fact, both the commoners had sex games that they would play as a group, and the chiefs had their own sex games that they would play as a group. And under those circumstances, it was fine. It was absolutely kapu to go in lines that were forbidden. Okay? But other lines of what we would consider relatives, that was not a problem. Incest was uncommon and usually only practiced in rare cases where two high chiefs wanted to have a child who was even a higher chief. Sometimes there was love between brother and a sister. Historically, there is one of those situations, very tragic story. But in other cases, it was done to produce a child of an even higher rank. Okay? But other than that, it was very uncommon. But where we would think they were being promiscuous, they were following the rules of their society, that they didn't go outside the bounds of that. So now here come these strangers who have no family ties. There's no threat perceived. Also, it was done to get items that were very valuable. So hey, you know, let's have some fun and give me an ale, okay? Because you know, they didn't think of it as selling themselves, okay? Because it was common to give gifts when you pleased somebody or were pleased by somebody. So their values were different in those times. And of course, when you started to get into the higher chiefly ranks, that wasn't done by the chiefly wives. They had to be much more circumspect because the chiefly lines had to be kept clear. But among the chiefs, it was common for there to be a lot of love relationships. Now, there were occasions where it was different, and they're so different that stories were made of it. So the story between Kamehameha the Great and Ka'ahumanu, he was very jealous of her. And so he put a kapu on her so that no other chief could touch her. And the same problem happened with Lonoika Makahiki. Only that guy had a wild temper, and he believed stories that weren't true. Okay, that's another. Someday I'll tell you that one. Okay. So their mores were different from the ones that we have. But within their own system, they followed the rules.
What about the venereal disease?
Venereal disease is true. As far as anybody knows from records, the Hawaiians did not have venereal disease. Now you got to remember, all the Hawaiians weren't visited, all the Hawaiians weren't seen, but as far as anyone knows from records, there weren't any. Until after Cook, and then the later people came in too. Cook's crew had a lot of problems. Okay? And there were lots of diseases the Hawaiians had never had, like measles and mumps and cholera and chicken pox and all that kind of stuff. That killed off most of the population. Yeah, so along with all the beauty and the wonder and the joy of the culture, which we're still trying to preserve today, they went through some tragic times. All right, with that, we'll complete. Thank you very much.